Hey everybody, Tristan here for Circuit Motorsports on another episode of Insider Knowledge, and today we are talking about cheap parts. And specifically, we have a cheap clutch kit that we're going to highlight today as to why buying cheap parts for your car is generally a bad idea. Okay, so we have a 1999 BMW M3 track car that we put together. This is a car that we purchased as a wrecked vehicle. It already had some modifications on it, and we basically got it set up for track day use. It already had a clutch in it, and we knew it was an aftermarket clutch because it made a little bit of noise, and it was definitely more aggressive than a factory clutch would be. So we've taken it to a few autocrosses, and we had it out at a track day here locally in Central Florida, and we got about 2 sessions on the car when we heard a little bit of drivetrain noise. This was out on the track, so we came in off the track, and as we came in off the track, the noise got way, way worse. It sounded like we totally destroyed the engine and the transmission. It was a terrible sound. I was driving the car at the time, and when I pulled into the pits, I totally anticipated there just being carnage everywhere. We turned the car off, got out, checked, engine looked fine, no fluids anywhere. Checked under the car, everything looked fine. I was able to start the car and put it in gear and get it to move, so I was a little confused as to what exactly happened. The noise was still there when we started the car. It got a little bit better as you revved it up, but it sounded pretty terrible. It basically sounded like there was 5 ball-peen hammers rolling around in the transmission as you were trying to drive the car. So we got the car on the trailer, got it back to the shop, and when we took the transmission off the engine, we found out that it had an aftermarket clutch in it, but it was a no-name cheap clutch, and unfortunately, the really cheap hardware that they used to put the clutch in had completely failed, and every single flywheel bolt that was holding the flywheel onto the crankshaft had sheared off. So the flywheel was literally held in place by just a little bit of the bolts that were left, and it was moving around quite a bit inside the transmission. At that point, we decided to try to salvage the engine and the crankshaft, because the problem with bolts that break off inside of a crankshaft is they're inside the crankshaft, which is inside the engine, which is still in the car. So if we couldn't get those bolts out, it would have literally been an engine teardown or a complete engine removal and put a new one in. Luckily, we were able to drill into the bolts, reverse thread them out of the crankshaft, and everything looked okay. And I'm going to show you here in a second what that looked like. Okay, so these are the flywheel bolts that would have come with the clutch kit themselves. Most clutch kits and flywheel kits are going to come with your throwout bearing, your pilot bearing, flywheel bolts or hardware, what have you. These are no-name bolts. They don't have any grade markings on them or anything like that. The problem is, as you can see here, these are all broken. So all these little pieces, these are the tips of the bolts. These should be just full bolts. What ended up happening is every one of these bolts sheared off, and the flywheel was no longer attached to the back of our crankshaft. So at higher RPM, the flywheel was just being held in place, very slightly by the clutch disc, and then at low RPM, the flywheel was just kind of, moving around on its own inside the transmission, making all kinds of noise. So these little pieces here, these were all stuck inside the crankshaft. So you'll have the crankshaft, these bolt into that, which holds the flywheel on, and then you have the clutch and the transmission. These were basically stuck inside the crankshaft. And what we had to do was, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but we had to drill out the bolt tips basically, and then we had to thread an extractor in and then reverse thread these out of the crankshaft. These would have been stuck inside the crankshaft, and this would not allow you to put a new bolt inside the crankshaft. Now obviously the crankshaft is inside the engine, and if all of these broke off and we were not able to get these out of the back of the crankshaft, we would basically have had to take the engine out of the car and completely tear down the engine and rebuild it with a new crankshaft. So not only did we have a clutch failure, and not only could that clutch failure have damaged the transmission, but it could also either damage the back of the engine or crankshaft, Or in the case of this hardware, this getting stuck in the back of the crankshaft would have been an engine rebuild. So all of this was caused by a cheap clutch kit and cheap hardware. Now I will make one note. This can happen with both cheap hardware and with an improper installation. If you were to really torque all of these down, you can basically stretch the bolt and weaken it, and then they can all snap off. So this could be bad installation plus bad hardware or cheap hardware. But the moral of the story here would be that 8 bolts right here could have basically caused thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. Okay, so in the end, we really lucked out. The only damage we had to the transmission was a little bit of scuffing on the inside of the bell housing. The transmission ended up being okay, and we were able to get all of the bolts extracted out of the crankshaft, so we did not have to worry about taking the engine out of the car. What we ended up doing was we put a new clutch kit in the car with a new flywheel, new bearings, new hardware, all that stuff, and the car is fine. Cheap parts, generally in the long run, are going to cost you more money, especially when you buy something, again, that's a very important component of the drivetrain of the car. So instead of purchasing a name brand clutch kit, if you spend $200-300 on a cheap clutch kit and you think you saved yourself a little bit of money, you could be spending thousands and thousands of dollars more down the line, because you could be looking at a damaged transmission, a damaged engine, a damaged car. You could even get hurt yourself. So it's just not worth it. In our opinion, and what we recommend, is that you buy name brand clutch kits or name brand performance parts. In this case, we have an example. This is an ACT HD clutch kit and a flywheel. This is actually what we used in our M3 track car as a replacement. We like this brand. We've got good luck with it. But even if you went with another brand, there's ACT, there's Exity, there's lots of other name brand clutch kits out there that are going to be better quality. The other advantage you have of going with a name brand clutch kit, like an ACT clutch kit, would be if you have any problems, you can give them a call. They have a customer service line. They have a warranty. So you have access to a real company that makes real parts. Whereas if you buy something cheap off of eBay, there's nobody to call. You can't call and say, hey, I'm having a problem. You just bought off of eBay. There's, maybe a seller might answer your messages, but they're not the manufacturer. So generally they can't help you. So the moral of the story is, not just with clutch kits, but with any performance part, you should not buy cheap parts, because you can save a little bit of money now, but you could be spending a lot more money later. And this is a perfect example where, there was a minor failure, but it cost a lot of money. I mean, even just on our end, we missed 2/3 of our track day. So there was a lot of time getting out to the track and back, obviously pulling the transmission off, replacing the clutch kit and the flywheel, replacing the other components. There was a lot of labor time and just trying to extract these pieces out of the crankshaft. This is not a quick job. So we did not install this clutch kit. It came with the car, but this was a perfect example for us to be able to explain to you why it is better for you to spend a little bit more money to begin with and just have a quality product than the other way around. So if you guys have any questions or comments, please post those below. If there's anything you'd like us to discuss or cover in the future, you can post those below as well. If you like this video, please like and share the video. You can also subscribe to our channel, and that way you'll be able to get any updates on future insider knowledge videos that we put out. Thank you.